Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix. This is Chapter 8 of Micronation. A Cunning Plan. Chester Arthursen's prison record number 4512. Things had gone much better for me in prison since the chaos. I guess on some level they all knew that they owed their lives and their freedom to me, even if the vast majority of them pretended it never happened. This was both a blessing and a curse. I was given a wider range of privileges than I had experienced before. I pretty much had free reign of the prison. A tiny part of my mind contemplated escape, but I was soft. Life on the run, without credit cards, cell phones, or computers, did not appeal to me in the least. Speaking of which, I had almost unlimited access to the internet. They filtered it, of course. I could look at virtually anything I wanted, but could send nothing. Not much point in a secret prison to make you disappear if you could send email to anyone you want, willy-nilly. The true downside of all this was being alone. They kept the male and the female populations truly separated now. While I had never been a social butterfly, I still had the occasional visit or social activity with a random person at lunch. Now they all looked at me like I was a cross between God and the devil. I could tell that I made them uncomfortable. Not that I entirely blamed them, I also made myself uncomfortable. It had been a year and a half since my initial incarceration when Prow decided to visit. Of course, that is somewhat inaccurate since one does not simply casually visit in circumstances such as mine. I should have known Prow would not be able to leave me alone. I was sitting on the facilities, pondering the nature of life in the universe, when I heard a muffled voice from the area of my nether regions. Looking down, I initially saw nothing. Life had taught me caution, however, and I immediately stood up and looked around. I didn't see anything at first. When I stepped out of the light, I noticed a piece of excrement that didn't look quite right. Was it plastic? Had it not heard the voice, I wouldn't have known to look for it. "Watson?" the voice of doom inquired, quiet, resolute, and firm through a porcelain altar in which this oracle now resided. "Watson, are you in there?" I knew it was Prow. He would not let up until I responded or destroyed the offending article. I had no desire to reach down and do the deed of crushing it, given its current companions. "What?" I whispered, getting close to the bowl as I dared. I was not entirely sure I wasn't hallucinating. "We need to get you out. The fate of the world is at stake." Typical Prow. "Let me get this straight. You put me in here, and now you want to get me out. It doesn't work like that. Prison is not a storage bin." "Yes, it is," Prow said with all the confidence in the world. "All right. Fine, I suppose it is, but it's society's storage bin, not yours." I didn't care if I was alone in a cell. I looked around carefully to make sure no one saw me taking my shit. You don't want to go alone in that section of the prison. "Am I not a member of society?" It was at this point that I flushed the toilet. I didn't care if it was the only conversation I'd had in 6 months. I didn't care if that voice in the back of my head said that Prow was right more often than he was wrong, and that the fate of the world the fate of the world might be at stake. I was simply not going to get into an argument like this. I was still convinced, on some level, that the guards had got a recording of Prow's voice and put it in the plastic, but I knew Prow. Such behavior was more than possible for him. I waited for 15 minutes, more than prepared to flush the toilet again if I had to, but nothing happened. Resigned that it had at least had some time for peace, I laid down on my plain, unmade bed. All I had to keep me warm at night was a single generic sheet. Damn him. That voice had been enough to make me long for my previous life. Not Prow. I missed real food. According to the hardcore inmates who had been in normal prison, the food here was quite excellent for prison food, but it still tasted like crap. I wanted to be able to go where I wanted. When I wanted, I couldn't. My freedom had been taken away, and I resented it. Oh, I wasn't an innocent man, and I knew it. I was one of the few that actually admitted I'd done something wrong. While I was sorry about the methods I had used, I was quite proud of the fact that I managed to make Prow miserable. He deserved it. The universe demanded it. I'd reformed in many ways, but I wasn't a saint. The resentment I felt didn't really encourage any kind of rehabilitation. It didn't help that in this particular prison there was a significantly higher percentage of actually innocent people than there were in other places. When the government could just take people and lock them up for no particular reason, that it did not exactly encourage my faith in justice or sharpen my appetite for civic duty. Indeed, Given what I knew about the meme stuff alone, what real guarantee did I have that they would let me go when my sentence was up in 3 years? That still didn't mean that I wanted to be let go. It wasn't Helsinki syndrome. As I said, I hated my captivity, but the slim hope of release was better than living as a fugitive. I sighed and picked up one of the novels that I had checked from the other prisoners' I checked out from the prison's rather extensive library. It was mindless drivel, something about the society of tomorrow and a little girl's fantasy world come to life. I fell asleep after about a chapter and a half. I woke up when they did the head count that night. I had to stand in front of the bars of my cell and wait for the guard to confirm that I was there. As he walked by, clipboard in hand, a tiny terrified part of me worried that somehow they had found out about Prow's unusual microphone. My fears proved groundless. The guard walked by and kept counting just as he always did. If anything, he went by my cell a little quicker than he did the others. He had been there and part of the chaos, after all. Amazing how something like a little temporary anarchy can show us how thin the boundaries that divide us are. I retreated in self-misery to my bed. The cell was very large. Since the chaos, most of the others had to share a cell. It was my privilege to have one to myself. It was a perk, and I was glad to have it, but I was also completely aware that it was more a matter of no one wanting to be in the same cell I was in. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. I was too tired. It was times like this that I wish I had Darla's ability to sleep on a dime, or anywhere else for that matter, when she wanted. Not that I wanted narcolepsy. 2 more days passed uneventfully. While time did odd things to the mind in prison, it also tended to speed it up if you became skilled at ignoring it. One generally had very little freedom, but in its own perverse way, one did have freedom from time, unless you chose to pay attention to it. The routine, however, wasteful, torturous, or boring, could be a distraction from other things you didn't want to think about. This could not be the case with Prow looming on the event horizon. Every voice, every movement, and every shadow whispered the promise of another encounter with Prow. Now prison truly was prison. I had no rights, no recourse, and no retreat. Unless I had some evidence, going to the warden or a guard with stories of my previous encounter with Prow would get me placed in the psych ward. Eventually, I started to let my guard down. The part of my mind that kept me sane forced me to consider the possibility that it might have merely been a hallucination. Being who I was, it was precisely these moments that I was most mentally prepared for Prow, for it was in these shadows of a moment that he made his infuriating presence known. But after 2 days, I was at my wit's end. I could stand the tension no longer. Quite frankly, I didn't care if Prow appeared or not. He was an idiot. Thus it was, true to form. In the final roll call of the night, the face of Prow rose up in the guise of a guard. He said nothing, of course, merely walked up to my cell as it would any other guard, but I knew it was him. He winked at me. I had seen him come up through the shadows and then vanish like a wraith that he was. I got no sleep at all that night. When the guards came for my work shift in the morning, I feigned violent illness. Quiescence Prow was out there. Quiescence Prow was everywhere. Quiescence Prow was God, and God hated my cowardly little guts. No sleep for the wicked. My tortured mind kept insisting I was silly. I was overreacting. There was no Quiescence Prow. I was in prison for some other reason, bank robbery, or perhaps accounting fraud. Prow did not appear that night at roll call, and I slept with such exhaustion and bliss as I can ever recall. This kind of reverie did not last, however, for I was awakened from my wonderfully interesting dream about Darla and Amber Love when something hit my cheek. In my awakening stupor, I realized it was a smooth stone of some kind. I put it down on the ground with one hand and checked the time. It was 5 a.m., nearly dawn. I went back to sleep, at least I nearly did so, until I heard, "Wake up, Watson," from the Grim Reaper himself. A chill ran down my spine as I stood bolt upright. There he was in the flesh. His hollow face and beady little eyes looked falsely hopeful underneath the cap and camouflage of the guard's uniform he wore. Time had changed him. If anything, he seemed more fit, more implacable, and more sure of himself than ever before. One detail stood out above all the others, however, and that was the gold wedding band on his left hand and how I hated him for it. I hated him with every fiber of my being, and a bit more charged on the credit card to hell besides. "What do you want?" I asked. Quiescence Prow stood there, quite confident in his guard uniform, that I could not and would not strangle him with the power cord from the lamp. He was wrong. The foul hole through which his vocabulary produced words and his black lungs pulled in treasonous oxygen from my cell kept him alive as he spewed, "I've come to get you out. Really? I tartly replied. Yes, he replied right away. The fate of the universe, or at least the world, depends on us. Really? I managed, much to my surprise, to repeat that statement instead of grabbing the cord. Yes, Prow was exasperated. This was a glorious thing. It had been so long since I'd seen that expression, I'd forgotten how much I missed it. I did not, however, miss it enough to spend any more time with Quiescence Prow. Pass. Excuse me? Prow couldn't believe it. I giggled. You heard me. I don't care. I'm not going with you. Not even to save the world? Especially not to save the world. I laughed. Don't you even know do you even want to know how it's threatened? Nope. And much to my surprise, I didn't. I really didn't care about the world. Not if it meant saving it with Quiescence Prow on it. Not even the obvious fact that I happen to be in that world too. Oh, come on, Watson. This is really being nonsensical. Nonsensical, I almost shouted. Yes, from you. I did shout at that time. Yes, from you. I did shout it again. I don't get the word nonsensical coming from you about someone else. My voice raised an octave. Get out of my cell or I'll call the guards. I am the guards, he said smugly. I know things to tell the other guards that will make things very unpleasant for you. I don't care what your cover story is. Get out. Prow almost assuredly didn't know about the earlier incident in which I had played part. That gave me leverage, and I intended to use it. What do you mean, Chester? He used my first name. He was really desperate. Good. What things? What have they done to you in here? Guards! I shouted at the top of my lungs, grinning demonically as Prow scrambled out of the cell. Oh, this was worth prison. It had been worth every glorious minute. There was a god, and he was not Quiescence Prow. He went out and tried to wave the other guards away like nothing was the matter. They hadn't come yet, but they would if I kept shouting, Chester, Watson, be reasonable, Prow hissed through the bars. Go away, Quiescence. Go away before I make you regret it, I smiled. This isn't over, Watson. If I have to, I will make you leave this cell. You and what army, Quiescence Prow? Get out of here now. And he scurried away like the little dog he was. Oh, mercy, that was lovely. That was sublime. My life now had purpose. And it was boring the rest of the day, but when I asked the other guards about him, I found out that Prow had quit. Absolutely perfect. The next day went quite well. I enjoyed my prison time. I felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders, and that I could live my life as full and in a complete way again. I even tried opening up a bit more to my fellow prisoners. This was hard to do at first, but by the time the first week had passed, I almost had some, quote, friends, end quote. Rather, I knew some people that didn't cower at my mere presence or avoid their eyes whenever I was near. This could not go on, of course. I should have known better. But I was too high on my own success. That was why I paid so bitterly for it. Only a fool allows himself to enjoy his life, lest you be punished by the gods of Prow. He showed up during lunch. This time, however, he was dressed as a prisoner. I could not believe it. Sneaking in as a guard was one thing, but this, he sat right down at the table directly opposite me. He stared at the man who I had been talking to, or rather, talking at, since he had mainly politely listened while I talked, until my erstwhile companion moved several seats away. There, Prow said triumphantly. No, we can talk. No, we can't. I stood up and walked away. Prow followed. Everywhere that Chester sat, the Prow was sure to go. This repeated 5 or 6 times. Finally, I decided that I was not hungry and left. Prow followed until the guards stopped him. Normally, prisoners were moved as a group. I was an exception. I tried not eating for 3 days, but eventually the guards caught on and forced me to go to the cafeteria. I found myself looking around at several of the larger males, pondering if I could get them to take care of Prow for me. I saw several look back and decided that it was not a good idea. I would not listen to Prow. It was stubborn. I know. It was prideful, I know. But eventually I ended up standing upright next to the guards. I think Prow intuitively knew that they would not put up with his endless and highly annoying prattle. 2 weeks went by like this, and I could tell that even the unsinkable Quiescence Prow was getting discouraged. This lifted my spirits yet again, but I was far more cautious this time. It turns out that I had good reason to be. The next day, I saw Prow talking with some prisoners, and suddenly his spirits picked up. I didn't like this at all. When we finished our meal and returned, I found that I was no longer alone in my cell. The guards had let me off, had to get Prow off. The guards had to get me off Prow with a fire hose, 4 taser shocks, and brute force of 10 men. I was in solitary again. Didn't care. When they opened the door, I immediately stepped on the guard's foot and punched him. It went on like this for 5 days before the guards, with whom I had at least an amicable relationship, asked me why. Foolishly, I told them. I'm not entirely sure what drugs they were putting in my food after that, but I ended up in my cell with Prow, who chatted endlessly that he now had my undivided attention. I couldn't beat him up. I was too stoned to care. Prow tried hypnosis, but it didn't work. Finally, he tried withholding my medication, which only landed me back in solitary after I beat him senseless. Ah, bless. No Darla to defend her husband this time. After a while, the drug haze lifted again, and I found myself tied to the bed. Note to self, study escapology. Prow shined a flashlight in my eyes. Not dilated. Good. Guards! I shouted. Nothing happened. Guards! Still nothing. Guards? I practically mewed like a half-drowned kitten. I was beaten by Prow yet again. They've been thoroughly bribed. Now, you are going to listen to me? I screamed my rage at him until my throat parched and my voice cracked. Prow waited patiently. Now, as I was saying before you rudely interrupted me, there is a conspiracy. I need some work on a case with the Time Viewer in Alaska. I need your help to find the people we were originally looking for. No, I cracked harshly. Never. Not even the fate of the world? He asked. No. A kiss from Darla? I knew she'd never go for that. Besides, she was Prow's creature, and therefore she now repulsed me. No. $1 million? Prow held up 9 fingers that somehow added up to $1 million. Tempting. No. An answer to the question? No. I didn't want answers from him. Prow thought long and hard. If you help me with this, I will never bother you again. No. $1 million and a new identity. This time he tried 10 fingers. No. I laughed harshly. He was getting desperate. Please, Prow bragged. I'll do anything. I almost said no, but paused. Anything. Now there was a reward fraught with possibilities. Anything. And Prow was a man of his word. Oh, yes, this could get interesting indeed. Yes, I replied. I will help you. Prow sighed and smiled and breathed a sigh of relief. Good. What is it you want? I don't know yet. I'll let you know. I could tell that this bothered Prow, but he was wise enough not to push it. Excellent. How do we escape? Escape? Why would I want to do that? But you just said, I said I'd help you. Not that I would escape. Prow thought a good deal. I have it. A presidential pardon. I shall leave and secure one for you. More power to you. Win solution for me. Prow went to the jail and shouted, Guards! To the guards, I'm done! Huh? One of the guards said as they walked up to prison. Let me out. I'm done with Watson. The guards laughed. I paid you well. Now let me out. The guy laughed more. I'm an innocent man. Everyone but Prow laughed. I'm innocent. Right. Prow originally arranged for himself to only be in there for 30 to 40 days, but with the escaped attempts, a month slowly dragged into years. Is it especially cruel of me that I fed Prow's habit by inspiring him with more and more elaborate plans, which would always fail and got him thrown back into solitary? Quiescence Prow's unending luck had finally played out, and I couldn't be happier. In part 1.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the secret commentary at the end of each chapter of this novel. Right, so first of all, favorite chapter so far. Hadn't realized how much I was getting annoyed by Quiescence Prow. But I totally side with Chester here. And Prow was always annoying, but it just goes to show how incredibly stupid Prow is. And here's the thing. Both Chester and Prow are Arthur Avatar characters more than any other character I have, except, of course, Grenade Man, in any of the fiction I've ever written. And Chester is my sarcastic, cynical self, and Prow is my naive self that wants to believe that the world is a better place and is annoying as fuck, and sometimes the universe works out just right enough to continue to perpetuate my delusions. The main difference between any version of me and Quiescence Prow is, with a couple of exceptions, the universe has never moved itself to accommodate me. This is a fictional example of what would happen if that part of myself, specifically I'm thinking earlier in my life, probably from the age of about 18 to 30, where I believed that the universe was going to accommodate my desires, and it did not. Repeatedly, with a large clue by 4 in the face multiple times. But, you know, the thing is, the thing I find particularly ironic is, when I wrote this, I was still a member of the Mormon Church. But, you know, you want to talk about your foreshadowing or Chekhov's shotgun on the wall. This chapter really highlights the inevitable, you know, at the time I wrote this was about two parts of myself, not time differences. And to a certain degree, that is still true, mainly because even though I am not quite as cynical or sarcastic or nasty as Chester was then, and I frankly never was quite that bad, but Chester certainly represents an element of myself, mainly the one you hear ranting about in, you know, things like The Sins of Silicon Valley versus Quiescence Prow, which is more of the News of the Four Worlds or Space Goats side of myself. And, of course, I, being the most special snowflake, have actually multiple and highly organized versions of myself that someday I may talk about all of my special sides and all of that. But that's a different episode. Anyway, the thing I find particularly amusing and ironic about this chapter is it is just so prophetic about the inevitable conflict I have with the Mormon Church. I mean, that's not what this chapter is about. You know, all of the junior high school English students that will inevitably be writing essays about my work 100 years from now when it's discovered and becomes world famous. No, just kidding. But anyway, hypothetically, in some universe where that happened, you know, somebody looking back at my life and somebody looking at this chapter might think, you know, this was a subconscious reflection of his inevitable discovery about the falsity of the Mormon Church. And it is prophetic, but at the time I was Mormon and had no intention of leaving the LDS Church. But the fact of the matter is that it is still, nevertheless, incredibly indicative of, you know, somebody who's wrapped up in their old worldview and believes that the universe will accommodate them. And in certain cases, almost never mine, but in certain cases, the universe accommodates people who are in their bubble, right? People who have what Steve Jobs, or what was referred to with Steve Jobs, a reality distortion field, where the rules don't seem to apply them. People like Elon Musk or Trump, right? Who I almost, you know, if this is a simulation, you can look around and very clearly see who the players of the game are. And by the way, I am definitely not one of them. And odds are pretty likely you can look at your life and say, does the universe bend itself to my will, or, you know, bend over to accommodate me, kind of like it does Quiescence Prow? But, you know, even with Trump and even with Musk, right, sooner or later, the universe says, no, I'm sorry. I don't think so, right? Even with them, the bill comes due. And the bill certainly came due for Quiescence Prow. I totally think I enjoyed writing this chapter, aside from the incredibly disgusting, you know, submarine two-way walkie-talkie poop drone that is probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever written, even more ridiculous than the cockroach robot in chapter 2. But if I rewrote this, I might actually keep that. I gotta be honest, it's so fucking stupid that it's kind of quintessential quiescence. But either way, I can't think of anything more perfectly Prow than the idea that he's going to get himself into prison to talk to Chester and then believe that he's going to be able to get out, especially a secret government prison designed to, disappear people. I think what's particularly disheartening about this chapter is, the least believable, least plausible thing that I've written about is the dog that can detect radiation with its smell. I think that the most plausible thing that I've written about is the idea that our government, a democratic republic, the United States of America, that is supposed to stand for a hallmark of human rights. And here's the thing, despite all our hypocrisy, we still are. Make no mistake about it. If the United States had no interest in preserving democracy or preserving human rights, the world would be screwed. Part of that is image, and part of that is cultural institutions that do actually work to make the world a better place. And yes, the United States as a superpower does a lot of dark and evil things, but God help us all, they actually do some good. And at the same time, I look at the complete lack of accountability as of March 2022 of members of the Department of Homeland Security that literally rounded up peaceful protesters in unmarked security vans and drove around for a while. And the fact of the matter is that nobody knew where they were, and nobody knew what happened to them, and they were eventually released. But what if they hadn't been? Right? We definitely have immigrants and people without citizenship, sometimes who are actual American citizens that just happen to look Hispanic, that get rounded up and put into these places, sometimes a private prison, with no access to a lawyer, no access to the courts. And if you don't happen to have documentation on you that proves you're a United States citizen, the INS and the DHS and the Border Patrol have literally no fucking interest in proving that you're a citizen. So the idea that you could have a world where there's a political prison with people who are just inconvenient for the people in power to disappear them is, to me, the most scarily plausible part of this book. I do admit I've thought about rewriting it lots and lots and lots and lots, and I think at this point I actually am. It will have a totally different title. It will probably have totally different characters, except for Quiescence Prow, which is just a good enough name that I'm going to keep it. I may find out what those words mean in Finnish and change it. But I finally figured out the theme that's going to put all the things together. The short answer is it's going to be a combination of rewriting my second, fourth, and first novel in that order. I may or may not have shared characters between them. I mean, it's a tragic series, so killing people at the end of the first novel and the second novel is totally plausible. And, for rewriting the first novel, for rewriting the second novel, I can basically take all of the parts that work, which is, a weekly, monster / technology of the week thing that turns into a conspiracy that actually turns out to be real, that, shakes down the global consequences of what that means, which then later turns into the second, a rewrite of the fourth novel, which is corporations slowly getting more and more power. The difference between the rewriting the fourth novel and what I would actually write are only about 10% of the idea. Basically, if I was to write a summary of that novel, that's literally the only thing that's going to stay around. That and the fact that instead of pirates and coconuts as a video game, that video game is going to be based on Harry Potter. Because the first title I've known for years of this supposed trilogy, which would be The Boy with the Dragon Taboo. And Chester will be replaced by a parody of the asshole that wrote the fourth novel in the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, which thankfully has not had any more sequels. which, in case you're unaware, his asshole, the author of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is a brilliant writer who is dead, and his domestic partner has an unwritten fourth novel that he actually wrote, but instead his asshole father and asshole brother hired some lunatic loser to write a fourth novel that they actually made a series of, or a film in the United States, direct to English. Anyway, long story short, when I read the Wikipedia article and read that some asshole somewhere said that the first three novels were, quote, cartoonish, and this fourth one was even better, I knew that in the corrupt publishing house world, some asshole paid a reviewer. And when you write an unwelcome, unauthorized sequel to one of the most brilliant trilogies we've ever seen, I have a moral obligation to make fun of that asshole. So when I have that combined with a novel that I'm thinking about rewriting, which in this case is The Boy with the Dragon Tattoo and Micronation, and I have this character, Chester Arthurson, who's a complete lunatic and a failed technical writer, all I have to do is turn him into a failed writer, and suddenly I've got a novel that pretty much fucking writes itself. Now, the second sequel I haven't worked out because I basically need to go back and listen to Pre-Cyber and see which parts I contributed and which parts Ken contributed, and obviously I would only be keeping the parts I contributed. And kind of using that as the glue between my first and third novel. And at the end of the day, I strongly suspect that very little about the second novel, very little about my fourth novel will actually remain in this second hypothetical knowledge or thing of this. But one of the funniest podcast episodes I ever did and enjoyed doing was the Prisoner of J.K. Rowling about copyright reform. And I fully intend to do that. So in this case, I'm going to do a parody of J.K. Rowling. And I'm going to do a parody of her fan fiction of her own work, which is basically literally everything she's done after the first 7 Harry Potter novels, particularly The Coromandel Strike, which start out strong and then turn into a ridiculous fucking tract of anti-trans. So that kind of writes itself. I'm almost thinking that the only resemblance between the fourth novel and what I'm actually going to write is that basically it's going to have a techno-savvy, really sarcastic protagonist that won't be the protagonist of the first book in this trilogy. And then the third one will, in fact, be a rewrite of the first novel with time travel and fictional crap. I don't even know what it's going to be. Am I going to make fun of Elon Musk? Am I going to make fun of Mark Zuckerberg? But I'll be honest, I'm kind of heavily leaning towards the third one being a parody of Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse. The very idea that anyone on this planet is willing to let that asshole control the next version of the internet is so laughable that I'm like, did you read Ready Player One? Because Mark Zuckerberg is the closest example of a living person who is the villain of that novel that I have ever seen. The only person who I think might qualify as a better example of the asshole that is Mark, the asshole in the villain in that is the current CEO of Disney, who seems to be kind of a walking, talking turd. And even though I don't like him, I can't insult him enough to say that he's the most evil person on the planet, like Mark Zuckerberg is. Anyway, enjoyed this chapter. It gets even crazier and kind of crappier from here. But if you're somehow still listening to this, I hope you enjoy. And if you are enjoying, I'm pretty sure you're not listening to my commentaries literally tearing it apart chapter by chapter.